My most memorable moment in SEAL training, the entire block of training is incredibly memorable, but picking out what stands out of my mind is probably land navigation, and and I don't mean just doing the land navigation. What I felt was coming close to death. So this is in Southern California, and we do the land navigation course up in the mountains east of San Diego. And it doesn't, obviously the weather's not too bad in Southern California, but it was during the winter time and it was snowing. So we spent a week up there and we were sleeping in the snow, and of course you're PTing, you're learning land navigation, your body's just wearing down, or my body was just wearing down. And the day of the test, we don't have snow gear in SEAL training. You just have whatever you get. It's kind of traditional military gear. So I just had like the Bates Lights boots. They weren't water resistant by any means. By the time test day came, I had been putting Ziploc bags around my feet to keep the water out, because once you have wet feet in the snow, it's obviously not a good situation. So by the time the test day came, my feet had been sliding in my boots so much that my toenails were starting to come off. And on the day of the test, I had come down this real steep, I wouldn't say mountain, but hillside, and I could feel something happen with my toenails, like something popped off inside of my boot, and I could feel like fluid or liquid. My feet were the toenail bed was starting to bleed. So I took off my boots, and it was kind of freaked me out to see my toes. I thought I was getting frostbite. It was just this, and I plucked a couple toenails off, threw them into the snow. But as I was doing that, I kind of lost track of where I was, or my game plan, so to speak, and I ended up making this 180-degree mistake and went over this really steep hill, got all the way over the hill. I was just smoked by this point, and I realized that the 180-degree mistake I made was not a mistake, and I was going the right direction until I thought I made the mistake. So then I came back over the hill a second time, and this was a big hill, and by the time I got back over, I still had like 3 or 4 points to get, and I could barely walk. My energy levels were starting to drop, and it was getting to the point where I had to go 10 yards at a time. So I kept going. I got to like the second to last point, and I could feel myself starting to go out. I can remember like thinking of my kids, what's gonna happen if dad dies here in the snow. I started thinking, okay, I'm not gonna make it. And I was good at land navigation. I've passed many courses before, and I started thinking about other career choices and all of that. And I just stumbled back into camp because I thought, like I said, I thought I was gonna die. What makes the story so memorable is, I failed that land navigation test, but they do retest you. Typically they'll retest you the next day, but I got back into camp and they said, hey, what happened? I'm like, I ran out of time, talking to the instructors, hey, I ran out of time. And they're like, hey, do you think you're gonna be able to make it if we retest you? All the things that the instructors do when they're setting you up for a retest. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. In my mind, I was like, all I need to do is get some food, get to sleep, sleep that night, and I'd wake up the next morning and retest and pass. But what happened is they said, okay, great, we're gonna retest you an hour from now. So eat all the food you can, or get some food, get some water, and get set to retest. And I was just like, all I could say was hoo-yah, right? Hoo-yah is what we say in SEAL training all the time, and hoo-yah means all kinds of things. In this situation, hoo-yah meant, oh God, I'm gonna die if you guys retest me. But I mean, as a student, you can't say, hey, I'm pretty tired, I think I'm a little dehydrated and need some rest. That's not how that goes. So I went back onto the land nav course. And again, this takes several hours, and I was about halfway through. There was another guy in the class. He was a corpsman also. Corpsmen are, military medics or Navy medics. And he had seen me when I came back to camp the first time. He was retesting, but he knew I was in really bad shape. And he saw me start to stumble and fall over. So he kind of shadowed me. He was still getting his land navigation points so that he could pass and do what he needed to do. But he'd come check back on me. He knew the course I was on or the general direction. And just having that like gave me I would say the courage to keep going, because I knew if I did fall out, pass out in the snow, that he'd come looking for me. So the most memorable moment in BUD/S was during that land navigation, that second test. By the time I got back, like I said, the first iteration, I was walking 10 yards at a time. By the time I was on my way back from my last point, so I passed the test theoretically if I can get back to camp in time, I was stumbling like 2 or 3 steps at a time. And it's memorable because it became like this foggy dream state. And I remember getting back to camp just barely in time to pass, and I just started taking off my clothes. And mind you, again, it's snowing. It's freezing cold. I'm hypothermic. I'm dehydrated. I didn't have enough food in me. And I just started stripping down because I was delirious. And I just have this dream-like memory state of the snow and the trees and the other student who was shadowing me. And again, my kids were running through my head all of the time. During field training, I always think about my older kids, like what would I do if I knew they were sitting there watching me? So I have this weird dream phase where they were there. Obviously they weren't there, but I started hallucinating and all this stuff. And anyways, at the end of the day, when I got back and finally passed, I was just gone. Next thing I knew, I woke up in like old army tents. I woke up, I had 2 sleeping bags around me, space heaters. One of my buddies was sitting there like in tears trying to feed me M&Ms because he thought I was dead. He thought I was dying. So my most memorable moment in BUD/S is, for all intents and purposes, I experienced what I thought was death, and then I woke up with my buddy feeding me M&Ms. Weird memories of my kids being out there watching their dad fail and pass land navigation, and getting stuffed in a couple sleeping bags, and just being out. So that's my most memorable moment in BUD/S.